Okay, now we'll take a look at this text, beginning on page 2 here, the old man and the beautiful maiden. It's not called in the Zohar, the old man and the beautiful maiden. They don't have subtitles there. Last week we discussed a little bit about the authorship of the Zohar. The Zohar is written as a kind of commentary to the Torah. This particular text comes from the second book of the Zohar, second volume, around page 95. And as Tom Sawyer said to Huckleberry Finn, what do that mean, Huck? And we'll try to figure out what this means. And why, as I suggested to you, most of the major themes in Jewish mysticism are found here. So we'll take it slow because it's a rather complicated text, and try to unravel it. So I'd like you to read the text, and then I'll have some comments on it. So would someone like to start? Please.
Rabbi Yossi or Yossi?
It's actually Yossi, yeah.
Yossi.
Yeah.
Rabbi Hia and Rabbi Yossi met one night at the Tower of Tyre. They stayed there as guests, delighting in each other. Rabbi Yossi said, "I'm so glad to see the face of the Shekhinah. For just now, the whole way here, I was pestered by an old man, a donkey driver, who kept asking me riddles the whole way."
Okay, so you have two scholars meeting, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi. You have the meeting of two scholars, two friends, delighting in each other, you know, close. And reflected here is probably a reference to a statement in the Palestinian Talmud. If you want to look it up, it's in the tractate Eruvin. You see, because the Zohar assumes you know the whole rabbinic literature, so you make a reference, they assume you'll know it. Where it says, "Whoever receives the face of his teacher or his friend is as if he receives the face of God." In other words, friendship is an entree to a religious experience. So he says, "I'm so glad to see the face of Shekhinah." Shekhinah is the feminine manifestation of God. We'll get into that another time. So in seeing his friend and his colleague, it's like having a religious experience. It's like seeing God. These are the mystical companions. And according to the Zohar itself, the face of God is hidden in the face of the mystical companion. You have this old story about God is invisible, so how can you see a reflection of God? Well, you look at some other person, and there you see the reflection of God. So, in other words, God is concealed, the person's face is revealed. So you look at the person's face, who you're close to, and the concealed becomes revealed. And in very late Jewish mysticism, there is a school of Hasidim, followers of the Rabbi of Kalisk. The Rabbi of Kalisk developed the idea which he called dibuk chaverim, the cleaving of friends. And one of the customs they used to practice, the Kalisker Hasidim, was that every day that you would go to a private place with your best friend and you would talk about your innermost hopes, dreams, fears, apprehensions, plans, faults, and so forth. They saved a lot of money on therapy. So.
Right.
And this was called the Dibuk Haverim. You also have here the idea, very central to the Jewish mystical tradition, that study itself, these are two scholars, study itself is a mystical experience. That the study of the text of the Torah in the right atmosphere can lead you to a revelatory experience. In other words, that the idea is that since the Torah itself is revealed by God, by correctly studying the Torah, you re-experience, in a way, the initial revelation of the Torah at Sinai. And that therefore, if you study properly, as we put it last time, you go right to the horse's mouth. You go right to the source of the tradition. Now, I mentioned to you that the mystics had tremendous impact on the Jewish liturgy and celebration of the holidays. In the spring, we have the festival called Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. And according to Jewish tradition, this is the anniversary of what? The giving of the Torah at Sinai. And the Lurianic mystics in the 16th century in Safed developed the custom of spending the first night of Shavuot up the whole night studying. And this is called the Tikkun of the night of Shavuot. Tikkun means an act which helps to repair the world, or helps to repair God. And in the writings of the 16th century mystics who practiced this, one of them tells us, Isaiah Horowitz, his name was, originally from Poland, originally from Prague, then went to Poland, then went to the land of Israel, that in practicing the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, where they studied the texts all during the night, they actually experienced the revelation. So here you have the idea that revelation is not restricted to the Talmudic period, to the biblical period, not restricted to the land of Israel, but is available now, today, if you know how to unlock the keys of the text, if you know how to unpack the text through the right access code. In other words, that the Torah is a kind of access point to the divine, and therefore in order to experience and commune with the divine, the Torah provides a vehicle for this. And I would suggest, I don't want to get into it in any detail, just to sort of lay it out on the table, that in many ways, the role that Jesus plays in Christianity is the role the Torah plays in Judaism. That it is the kind of intermediary and access point to God if you can't have a direct access point. So for the Jewish mystics, the study of the Torah itself is a mystical experience. And later on, when we discuss different mystical techniques, you will see that for the Jewish mystics, this for them is a major technique. That if you know how to study the Torah correctly, you will have the highest possible mystical experience. That you don't need necessarily meditative techniques, you don't need mantras and things like this. That simply if you know the proper way of studying the Torah, decoding the Torah, then you will have the highest experience. This doesn't, of course, preclude the other routes. But for them, the best route was the study of the Torah, because the idea is that the presence of God is already in the letters of the Torah. And if you can get into the letters, if you can, say, infuse your soul in the letters where God already is, then you already have communion with God. Okay? So then he says, on the whole way here, I was pestered by an old man, a donkey driver, who kept asking me riddles all the way. As you always see with the Jewish mystics, one of the basic premises is, one of the basic themes is, that the apparent is not necessarily the real. That this guy who is a pain in the neck, excuse the pun, he's a donkey driver, pain in the ass, is not really a donkey driver. So the apparent is not necessarily the real. That this guy who is a donkey driver, which is not a very high profession, not usually identified with intellectuals, and who's saying stupid things, is not saying stupid things, and is not unintelligent, and is not from the lower rung of society. But this will opens up. And the fact that he already says an old man gives you a hint that he's not what he appears to be. Because old man doesn't simply mean a man who is aged, it means a man who is advanced in wisdom, not simply an aged. Even in English, we have the word elders. You can be an elder, say, in a community or a city or something like this, without necessarily being old. Okay, now he gives you some of the donkey driver's riddles. So here's riddle number 1. Would you like to continue, please?
What is a serpent that flies in the air and wanders alone, while an ant lies peacefully between its teeth? Beginning in union, it ends in separation.
Okay, so that's riddle number 1. And we'll see later on what these riddles mean. But in this riddle, there may be, well, I'm not going to, let's leave that till later. Okay, next riddle.
What is an eagle that nests in a tree that never was? Its young who have been plundered, who are not created creatures, lie somewhere uncreated. When they go up, they come down. Coming down, they go up. 2 who are 1, and 1 who is 3.
Now here there is an allusion, which you wouldn't get otherwise, to the idea of transmigration of souls, reincarnation, that the souls go up and then they come down in some different form. The 1 and the 3 refer to the men. You have the 2 rabbis and the donkey driver. So eventually at the end you'll see that the 3 become 1. According to another commentary, it refers here not to the men but to 3 parts of the soul, 3 aspects of the soul that are at the same time 3, but since they're all part of the same soul, are really 1. See, the idea is that the soul has different levels. And for the Zohar, generally there are 3 levels. There's the lowest level, which is called the nefesh. And then you have the next highest level, ruach, you see, because in biblical Hebrew, all these terms are translated later on as soul. And then you have neshama, and these are the 3 standard parts of the soul. But then you have different systems where you have 5 parts. But I'm not going to get into that. And to make it even more complicated, according to some, when you have the transmigration of soul, what transmigrates? Do these transmigrate as a composite, or does each transmigrate separately? So the same person then can transmigrate each part separately. Becomes rather complicated keeping track of somebody. Okay, now we come to the 3rd riddle, which is for the purpose of this text the most important.
What is a beautiful maiden who has no eyes, and a body concealed and revealed? She comes out in the morning and is hidden all day. She adorns herself with adornments that are not.
Okay, so the maiden, as you'll see, is going to refer to the Torah. Concealed and revealed, they love, as I mentioned to you last time, paradox. It's like the text of the Torah, concealed and revealed. We'll see later what she comes out in the morning and is hidden all day means, and what the adornments are. Okay? Now what happens?
All this he asked on the way. I was annoyed. Now I can relax. If we had been together, we would have engaged in words of Torah instead of strange words of chaos.
In other words, we could have studied the Torah instead of dealing with all these stupid riddles. Okay?
Rabbi Shia said, that old man, the donkey driver, do you know anything about him? He answered, I know that there is nothing in his words. If he knew anything, he would have opened with Torah. Then the way would not have been empty.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it seems that he has not talking anything about Torah, but as we'll see, he really is, because the apparent is not necessarily the real. And he's mad because there is this tradition that God accompanies those who are traveling, and in their travels are speaking the Torah. So he's upset because the fact that the donkey driver is raising all of these idiotic riddles, which have nothing to do with the study of the Torah, apparently, is robbing them of the opportunity of having God with them. Okay? So now what happens?
Rabbi Kia said, "That donkey driver, is he here? For sometimes in those empty pools you discover bells of gold."
So Rabbi Chia, you see, is the better mystic, because he already sees that the apparent is not necessarily the real. That there may be, in these apparently stupid things, bells of gold. Now, bells of gold can have a number of possible reference. One is the bells of gold were worn by the high priest. So in other words, what seems to be stupid may in fact be profound. In other words, the high priest is the highest guy, so maybe what he's saying is like the bells of gold of Aaron. The bell is also a symbol of revelation and the possibility of delving into the mysteries of the Torah, like the high priest does. He studies the Torah before he goes into the Holy of Holies on the holiest day of the year. So Rabbi Chia is saying this donkey driver, who seems like an idiot that's saying stupid things, may in fact be saying very profound things and may be able to lead us into some kind of intimate relationship with God rather than taking away the communion with God. Okay?
He said to him, "Here he is, fixing up his donkey with food." They called to him. He came before them. He said to them, "Now 2 are 3, and 3 are like 1.
Okay, so the first riddle is solved, right? This is how the 3 are really 1. The 3 of them, 2 rabbis and the donkey driver, are now one group. Okay?
Rabbi Yossi said, "Didn't I tell you that all his words are empty nonsense?" He sat before them and said, "Rabbis, I turned into a donkey driver only a short time ago. Before, I wasn't one. But I have a small son, and I put him in school. I want him to engage Torah. When I find one of the rabbis traveling on the road, I guide his donkey from behind. Today, I thought that I would hear new words of Torah, but I haven't heard anything."
In other words, I'm not the idiot, you're the idiots, because I'm trying to find out something new and I haven't heard anything from you. Last week somebody asked, I think you asked, about the workings of the chariot. And in the Talmud there is a reference that the disciple follows the donkey of the master, and when the disciple thinks he's ready to expound the mysteries of the chariot, he tells the master gets off the donkey and the disciple stops following. In other words, when the disciple has reached the point of taking the test to become the master, then he no longer has to follow the donkey. So the donkey driver is saying, "Look, I'm following you around, I want to hear the wisdom. Maybe I'm the master and you're the students. So maybe I have something to say because I haven't heard anything from you." And now he's going to have something to say. Okay?
Rabbi Yossi said, "Of all the words I heard you say, there was one that really amazed me. Either you said it out of folly, or they are empty words." The old man said, "And which one is that?" He said, "The one about the beautiful maiden."
So that's riddle number 3. He says, I think there's something to this. The others I'm not so sure, but this I think maybe there's something to it.
The old man opened and said, "Adonai is on my side, I have no fear. What can any human do to me? Adonai is by my side, helping me. It is good to take refuge in Adonai."
Okay, so the old man opened. This is a very typical linguistic style of the Midrash, that you begin a discourse by using the term "he opened." Namely, he opened the meaning of the text.
And the closed later, when it says the old man covered himself, rather, and the old man opened and said,
No, that's not a closing. No, he's covering himself for other reasons.
and then the next page, there's.
No, we'll get there. We'll get there. Now he says, God is on my side. In other words, he's going to expose some secret, hidden, esoteric meaning of the text, which is always a potential danger. So he's praying to God for protection, invoking God's name for help, because there is always a danger in revealing the concealed. It's always like opening Pandora's box, because the assumption is that the concealed wisdom, the fancy word for it is the gnosis. When you reveal the secret wisdom, there is always a danger that somebody can take it and misuse it. Remember a few years ago they had on Channel 11 a program they wanted to put on how to make an atomic bomb in your basement. And there was a big uproar. We shouldn't show people how to make an atomic bomb in your basement, because if you reveal secret wisdom, it's dangerous. And others said, well, you know, public information, people have the right to know. But the question is, do they have the right to know everything?
Is that from the same root as agnostic?
Yes, a Gnostic is one who knows the gnosis. And since he hasn't heard, the old man, donkey driver, any great wisdom from these two rabbis, he views them as being untested. So he's not sure that he should reveal the mysteries of the riddle and the mysteries of the text to them, because they may not be able to handle it. In other words, the idea is that not everybody should be granted knowledge of everything. That only certain people should be exposed to certain ideas, because they are not intellectually, morally, spiritually able to handle them. And if you expose too complex, too hidden ideas to people who can't handle them, it'll cause more damage than benefit. So here you have the idea that mystical ideas are potentially dangerous. It's an idea that you have running through the mystical tradition. And one other way to put it is the light fire. In other words, when someone is enlightened, are they going to get burned or are they going to get enlightened? And that depends on the person. So the idea is that the knowledge has to be restricted because it is dangerous, and because not everybody is able to absorb it, and not everybody has the spiritual basis to absorb it or the intellectual basis to absorb it.
What are the dangers?
You have the most famous story of the Jewish mystics in the Talmud. The most famous story in the Talmud of the Jewish mystics, I should put it that way. In the tractate Chagiga, page 14b, on the bottom of the page. The whole story is only 4 lines. You may have heard it. It's a story of the 4 rabbis who entered the mystical orchard, called in Hebrew Pardes. The Hebrew word Pardes comes from a Persian word, which is the same root as our English word paradise. And the story is that the 4 of them entered the Pardes. One of them went mad. One of them died. One of them apostatized. And only the 4th one, Rabbi Akiva, came out in one piece. In other words, the message there is that if this is what's going to happen to 3 out of the 4 of the greatest rabbis of the 2nd century, then what do you think is going to happen to people like us who aren't so great? In other words, the message is that there is a danger. There is a physical danger, the guy died. There is a psychological danger, the guy went mad. There is a spiritual danger, the guy apostatized. So there are physical dangers, intellectual and psychological dangers, and spiritual dangers.
It can
Those are the
also relate
dangers.
To giving information to children.
That's right too. But not only children. The idea is that unless you are prepared, having undergone a previous curriculum and being guided through it by a master, to get to a certain point, you put yourself in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which Talmud?
What do you mean, which Talmud?
You said it was
It's in the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Chagiga, page 14b. It's a very, very famous text. And speaking of Howard Schwartz, his latest book is on this text.
Question, the 3rd rabbi that lost the apostle, whatever, did he lose his Judaism? Did he become
Yes, he became a Gnostic. Or we don't know exactly what he became, but It seems he became a Gnostic. He believed that there were two gods and all kinds of things. His name was Elisha ben Abuya, and he is called in rabbinic literature Acher, which means the other one. There's a very famous novel written about him by the late Rabbi Milton Steinberg of the Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, called As a Driven Leaf, which is really, in my view, more about Steinberg than about Elisha ben Abuya, but that's another story. Okay, now we come to the crux of the stuff here. Yeah, somebody else want to read? Because you're doing so well, I didn't want to stop.
Yeah, you should be
Beautifully.
How good and pleasant and precious and high are words of Torah. But how can I say them in front of rabbis, from whose mouths, until now, I haven't heard a single word? But I should say them, because there is no shame at all in saying words of Torah in front of everyone.
Okay, now here it comes. So put on your seatbelts. Here we go.
The old man covered himself. The old man opened and said, Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain. What is this cloud? The one of which it is written, I have placed my bow in the cloud. We have learned that the rainbow took off her garment and gave them to Moses. Wearing the garment, Moses went up the mountain. From inside it, he saw what he saw, delighting in the awe, up to that place.
Okay. Any of you have any idea what's going on here?
Serpent with the arrow.
Pardon me?
Serpent with the arrow.
The serpent? Where's the serpent?
Oh, the arrow
What's
with
the
the bow.
serpent that flies in the air and wanders?
Oh.
Isn't that what the arrow?
No.
The bow.
No.
The bow, the bow's arrow.
The bow.
Oh, no. It's not it's the rainbow, right.
The rainbow.
All right. So the
Different cup from different mystical
So the old man covers himself, protection again. He opens and says, namely he begins his discourse. He opens the secret meanings. He begins, of course, with a text. Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain. When did Moses go inside the cloud and ascend the mountain? What's the mountain? Sinai. When does he go up Mount Sinai?
in the desert after Egypt.
A couple of times.
Well, he goes up here to get the Torah, okay? So in other words, here you have Moses, who is the greatest figure in Jewish tradition, right? Going to do the most important thing in all of Jewish experience, to get the highest revelation at Sinai. So Moses goes in the cloud. What is the cloud? Then he quotes another verse. I have placed my bow in the cloud. When does God place his bow, the rainbow, in the cloud? After Noah. So here is the covenant given to Noah compared to the covenant at Sinai. He places his bow in the cloud. Now, the cloud is the Shekhinah, is the feminine element of God. The image of Moses entering the cloud, obviously a sexual image. What is placed in the cloud? The bow. The bow is obviously a phallic symbol. Moses is having a kind of intercourse with the divine. In other words, the idea is that revelation is analogized to a kind of intercourse with the divine because it is the closest, most possible, most intimate experience with the divine. When you have the verse in the Psalms, for example, Moses is the man of God, Ish Elohim. Man in Hebrew also can mean husband. So they interpret it to mean Moses is the husband of the Shekhinah. Moses is the husband of the feminine aspect of God. When it says in Deuteronomy, Moses stood with God face to face, panim al panim, they took this as a sexual image of intercourse. Moses and Shekhinah face to face. So in other words, Moses, revelation at Sinai, symbolized as a sexual act, represents the most intimate relationship, communion, if you will, that the individual can have with the divine. The rainbow takes off her garments, namely the rainbow disrobes and gives it to Moses. Moses becomes robed in the garments of the rainbow. Wearing the garment, Moses goes up the mountain. The rainbow is also the symbol for the Torah. Torah. That the Torah, as we'll see later in the parable, undresses. In other words, that in order to see the essence of the Torah, the true meaning of the Torah has to take off its clothes so that the scholar can get to the essence. But we'll get to that a little later. So Moses puts on the rainbow and descends on the mountain. The rainbow is the garment which is protecting Moses as he goes up to the mountain. And from inside, again a sexual image, he saw what he saw. This is a very common phrase. He saw what he saw. Means he knows what he saw. But we can't tell you what he saw. In other words, it's ineffable. You can see it, but you can't express it. Delighting in the all. You find very common in Kabbalistic, even more in Hasidic texts, this use of the phrase delighting, which has clear sexual connotation, delighting in the all being, of course, God, and he goes up to that place. In other words, again, he has the most intimate communion with the divine in that place, the place being Sinai, where he has the reception of the Torah.
So that's like orgasmic.
No, we're not up to orgasmic yet. That's in another text. But
Yeah?
not yet. Look, orgasmic, you have plenty of stuff later on. You don't have to have it here. You'll have it later. We have another text we're going to look at that's plenty of it there.
From the Hebrew, is it clear that the it from inside it is the garment, not the mountain?
No, it's both. You see, because every phrase here is multivalent. It's the garment. It's the bow. It's the cloud. It's the mountain. It's the Shekhinah. It's the Torah. It's everything.
And the mountain is the foundation of the female body.
Sure. See, it's always many levels. There's no one idea. Okay.
Delighting in the all is everything about God?
No, the all is God.
Yes.
See, it's a capital A. The all refers to God here. Okay. Here we go again.
The comrades approached and threw themselves down in front of the old man. They cried and said, "If we have come into the world only to hear these words from your mouth, it is enough for us."
This is a phrase that is found infrequently, but sometimes in the Talmud. That when a disciple hears something from Master that he's just overwhelmed with, he says this phrase. In other words, if I was born only to hear this, it was worth it.
Yes.
I am always waiting for someone to say this after I give a talk, but never happened.
That's good PR.
Okay, now the old man talks again. So they've revealed that the old man is not simply a stupid donkey driver babbling riddles, but that the old man really has something very, very profound to say.
Donkey as she is.
I don't know.
The old man said, "Friends, comrades, not for this alone did I begin the word. An old man like me doesn't rattle with just a single word. Human beings are so confused in their minds. They do not see the way of truth in Torah. Torah calls out to them every day in love, but they do not want to turn their heads. Even though I have said that Torah removes a word from her sheet, is seen for a moment, then quickly hides away. That is certainly true. But when she reveals herself from her sheet, and hides herself right away, she does so only for those who know her intimately."
So here you have the idea of revelation is coming in kinds of flashes. Flashes of imagination. And this is why in the parable, the Torah is referred to as a maiden without eyes. Because it's a kind of seeing, it's a kind of perception through the imagination, not through the eyes.
There was another translation that suggested that it was upon whom no one had looked, that there are two ways that maiden with no eyes.
It could be. It could be. It could be. It could be. Okay, now we come to the crux of the text, the famous parable. And now we have to decode this.
A parable. To what can this be compared? To a lovely princess, beautiful in every way, and hidden deep within her palace. She has one lover, unknown to anyone. He is hidden too. Out of his love for her, this lover passes by her gate constantly, lifting his eyes to every side. She knows that her lover is hovering about her gate constantly. What does she do? She opens a little window in her hidden palace and reveals her face to her lover. Then swiftly withdraws herself, concealing herself. No one near the lover sees or reflects, only the lover. And his heart and his soul and everything within him flow out to her. And he knows that out of love for him, she revealed herself for that one moment to awaken love in him.
Okay, so the parable is the parable of the princess. Already in rabbinic literature, in the Talmud, the Torah is compared to a princess. The background setting here is, of course, Spain in the Middle Ages. So you picture these, big castles with the little minarets and the little narrow windows on top. It's a kind of Kabbalistic version of the Rapunzel story, in a way. She has a lover outside. The lover is, of course, the scholar who's perusing the text, trying to find the secret meaning of the text. And the secret person who wants to find the secret meaning of the text is, of course, the mystic. Now, the meaning here, and the meaning of the parable, is that the princess is the Torah, the lover is the scholar, and what is the scholar after? Communion with the Torah, or in the parable, intercourse with the princess. Now, what does all this have to do with the text he began with on the last page about Moses going into the cloud? The message here is a very, very critical one for the mystics, and a very bold one. What the text is saying is that the lover, who is the mystic, can accomplish through the intimate relationship with the Torah, who is the princess, what Moses accomplished at Mount Sinai. In other words, in this view, Moses is not an unreachable model, an unattainable model, but rather Moses is a model to aspire to. And that if the person, if the mystic in this case, has mastered the right techniques, the mystic can attain the intimacy with the Torah, the intimacy with God, the communion with God that Moses obtained at Sinai. It's a very bold claim, because the working assumption throughout most of Jewish tradition is that Moses is on a level himself, that no one can attain this level. It's restricted to him. Here they're saying is, if you use the right techniques, if you are able to achieve through the study of the Torah a level of deep communion, deep intimacy, symbolized by with all kinds of sexual symbols here, then you can achieve the same level. The mystic can achieve the same level of intimacy with the Torah, intimacy with God, intimacy with the text that Moses achieved at Sinai, which was the highest point in the spiritual histories of the Jews. And then the question becomes, what is that technique? And that's one of the issues now the text is now going to turn to. They're not going to give you all the answers, what is the technique, but they're going to give you some notion of what is the technique.
So it is with the word of Torah. She reveals herself to no one but her lover. Torah knows that he who is wise of heart hovers about her gate every day. What does she do? She reveals her face to him from the palace and beckons him with a hint, then swiftly withdraws to her hiding place. No one who is there knows or reflects. He alone does. And his heart and his soul and everything within him flows out to her. That is why Torah reveals and conceals herself. With love she approaches her lover to arouse love with him.
Okay. So, the scholar, is hanging around the castle. Namely, he is constantly perusing and studying the texts. So he's already made a commitment to her and to the text. Therefore, he's the only one that she's going to reveal herself to. In other words, only he'll be given the access code. What does she do? She reveals her face to him from the palace and beckons him with a hint. In other words, here you have the Torah seducing the lover. He is too stupid to figure it out himself. So she's seducing him. It's as I discussed last time, an active passivity. He's actively being seduced. He wants to. That's why he's hanging around the palace. But it's a receptivity on his part because she's the actor. The action is coming from her. So she is seducing him in to the palace, and his heart and soul and everything within him flows to her. Here I think in this phrase, flows out to her, you have exactly this idea of the active receptivity. It's a very active seduction. When I mentioned to you last week that Jewish mysticism, the term is Kabbalah, which etymologically means to receive, but nonetheless it's an active receiving. Here you have, I think, a very good example of this. Okay, now we come to the critical part of the text.
Come and see. This is the way of Torah. At first, when she begins to reveal herself to a human, she beckons him with a hint. If he knows, good. If not, she sends him a message, calling him a fool. Torah says to her messenger, "Tell that fool to come closer so I can talk with him." As it is written, "Who Who is the fool without a heart? Have him turn in here. He approaches. She begins to speak with him from behind a curtain she has drawn, words he can follow until he reflects a little at a time. This is Rasha. Then she converses with him through a veil, words riddled with allegory. This is Haggadah.
Okay, so here you have the seduction of the scholar, which is the seduction of the guy hanging around the palace by the princess. The way of the Torah. She beckons him with a hint. If he knows, good. If not, she sends him a message calling him fool. In other words, he's too stupid to figure it out himself. Tell the fool to come closer so I can talk to him. Talk in Rabbinic Hebrew already is a euphemism for sexual relations. Let him turn in here. Again, another sexual connotation, but here he's turning in, namely he's entering the palace. Once he enters the palace, he approaches. She's hiding behind veils. In other words, it's not yet clear what she looks like. He has not yet achieved intimacy with her. She speaks to him behind the curtain, and this is called drasha. Drasha relates to midrash, the rabbinic explanations of the Torah. So let's say Talmudic rabbis. But is this the starting point? No, this is already the second step, because the starting point is what is called the pshat. Now, pshat, any of you know what pshat means? It's generally translated as the simple explanation, literal explanation, or contextual explanation. But for the mystics, it means something else. Because they point out that the verbal root, pashat, lifshot, also means to disrobe. So because if you're dealing with the literal level of the text, what do you need a commentary for? If you know what you mean, what do you have to figure out what it means for, if it's so clear? So the mystics said, well, it's not so clear. You have to disrobe the text. That's pshat. You come then to the next level, where she converses through a veil. This is Haggadah. Haggadah means the telling, but here it means something else. In medieval philosophical Hebrew, Haggadah was another word for allegory. And we'll see why this is important in a minute. What about it? That's midrashic.
And so allegory is step 3.
Darash at step 2, right?
Right.
Do you happen to know the Aramaic for curtain and veil?
I can check it.
Once he has grown accustomed to her, she reveals herself face to face and tells him all her hidden secrets, all the hidden ways, since primordial days, secretive in her heart.
Okay, so here he reaches the fourth and highest level. And this is called by the Kabbalists the level of sod, or mystery. In other words, this is the level where all the mysteries are revealed. This is a level of greatest intimacy. This is where he stands with her face to face. Again, the sexual connotation. All the barriers are down. Complete communion, complete intimacy. Again, like Moses. And she tells him all the hidden secrets, namely the Torah reveals all the hidden secrets and all the hidden ways since primordial days. In other words, the reference here is to the Talmudic tradition that the Torah pre-existed the existence of the world, that all truth is contained in the Torah, if you know how to decode it. So she tells him not only what the text that we have means, but what all of the deepest meanings are. So now what happens to him?
Now he is a perfect human being, husband of Torah, master of the house. All her secrets she has revealed to him, withholding nothing, concealing nothing.
Here we have the idea, again, very, very critical, that the mystical experience is not simply an experience, but a transformatory experience. That the person who you have after the experience is a different person than you had before the experience. That the experience of learning, the experience of penetrating the meaning of the text, is not simply to increase your information bank, or how many, what do you call it in computers? K's, or what is it? K's or R's, whatever you have. You have bits, but rather to transform the person as the result of the experience. So the lover of the Torah, in this case the mystic, becomes the husband of the Torah, becomes engaged to the Torah. Here, in the beginning of the process, he had no relation with the Torah. He was outside the castle, couldn't get in, had no relationship with her. Now he has intimacy with her, and as a result of this intimacy, he is transformed. He attains a higher level of consciousness, and he becomes the husband of the Torah, which is the term the Zohar itself uses to describe Moses. So again, he attains the level of Moses.
What word does it use?
Pardon me? What?
What word does it use?
I don't know exactly here. I have to check that.
The question about the top of the page, it says, this doesn't make any sense to me. Who is the fool without a heart? Have him turn in here. Does that mean you're supposed to be a fool without a heart? Is that good?
No, it doesn't mean you're a fool without a heart. It means he's a fool in that he can't figure out the meaning of the text, and so he's the one that turns in. He's the one that enters the palace. That's part of the
Is that how he gets
seduction.
in? Is that part of how he gets in? I mean, is that a good thing?
What?
To be a fool without a heart that sounds like.
You may be
If-
foolish,
is
but
there-
you have a heart
is there an
that's more
entry?
in love with him.
Is that the entry level? I mean, is that
He's
how
a
he
mystic.
That's how he's that's to juxtapose what happened, this level before he gets in, to how he is after the
Okay.
experience, the transformation. Because after the transformation, he's no longer a fool, and he's committed to her.
Mhm.
He becomes her lover.
He becomes a husband, really. Aren't they married? I mean,
Both. Okay, now they have a little reminiscence on the seduction process and what was going on there.
She says to him, "Do you see that word, that hint with which I beckoned you at first? So many secrets there. This one and that one." Now he sees that nothing should be added to those words and nothing taken away. Now the pshat of the verse, just like it is. Not even a single letter should be added or deleted. Human beings must become aware. They must pursue Torah to become her lovers. He was silent for a moment. The comrades were amazed. They did not know if it was day or night, if they were really there or not.
So what they're trying to say here is that what happens to the scholar is parallel to what happens to Moses. What happens to the princess is parallel to what happens to the Shekhinah. And that the interpreter, by having intimacy with the text, essentially becomes identified with the text. In other words, you no longer have the interpreter, the mystic here, and the text there, but the text becomes part of the mystic becomes part of the text. So it's no longer that he studies the text, studies the Torah, he in effect becomes the Torah. The Torah becomes sort of incarnated within him. And that through this act of interpretation of the Torah, the mystic not only is granted the revelation of the meaning, a revelation compared to the revelation of Moses, but that in the process of interpreting the text, the mystic, in a sense, becomes the co-author of the text. In other words, it's a creative act, it's a procreative act. The sexual analogy, procreative, which you can take as one word or as procreative.
How do you see that when it becomes the creator?
I didn't say creator, the co-creator.
The co-author, I mean, here it just sounds like there's a...
That's here, but I'm talking about how the later mystics interpret it. So let me give you an example. You have a responsum, legal decision, 17th century, North Africa, David ibn Zimra, mystic and halachist. And he's asked the following question. It seems like a very prosaic question. If you have a Torah scroll in the synagogue, you know, in the Torah scrolls in the synagogue, the vocalization, the vowels are not put in. He's asked the question, suppose somebody put it in. Can you read it in the synagogue? And he says, no, you can't read it in the synagogue. Why? Because he says you need the person to give it the voice. In other words, you have this old tradition of the mystics that the letters are like the body of the Torah, the vowels are like the soul of the Torah. Unless you have the person to vocalize it, to give the Torah a voice, the Torah is just a dead body. So in other words, you need the body and the soul. You need what is giving it a soul. The English word is animate. Anima means soul. You animate the Torah. You make it alive, and thereby you become the co-author. The interaction between the reader and the text, in which the reader gives the meaning to the text, makes the reader the co-author of the text. And I'll get into that more when we discuss the idea of Torah in Jewish mysticism.
Does that contradict, or is that different from the kind of fundamentalistic view of a one-time unilateral revelation of Sinai?
Yes, the idea is it's continuous.
So,
It keeps going on, and you keep trying to decode what was already given. But here is the other idea in the end of this text, which is very critical. You have these four levels of interpretation. I mentioned to you before the story of the Pardes, the four scholars that went into the mystical orchard called Pardes. Later, in the Middle Ages, they took each of the letters in Hebrew of this word Pardes, and they equated it with a level of understanding the Torah. The P was for Pshat, the D was for Drasha, the R was for Remez, which means hint, which was in the Middle Ages equivalent to Haggadah or allegory, and the S was Sod, which means mystery. Now what is this text saying? Something very specific. It's saying here you have four levels of understanding the Torah, running from the lowest level to the highest level. What does it mean? This is the level for, say, the people. Simple level. This is the level you find in the rabbinic writings, Talmudic writings. This is the level you find who uses allegory in the Middle Ages, the medieval Jewish philosophers. And then you have the highest level, which is the level of intimacy, the level of Moses. Whose level is that? The mystics. In other words, it's a kind of propaganda for the Kabbalistic view, saying we not only have superseded all previous views, but that we give you a route not only to understanding the text in its deepest possible way, which the other routes don't give you, but we give you a route to intimacy with the text, intimacy with the Torah, intimacy with God, that even Moses achieved. The highest possible intimacy. I mean, it would be like, saying to some kid today on the street, look, if you follow our method, you can play like Jordan. Not that you'll know how to play basketball, but if you follow our method, you'll be the best. That was the propaganda for the mystical view they were giving here, that it supersedes all the previous views, all the previous approaches, and that it gives you a way of approximating the level of understanding of Moses, an extremely radical view. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that the mystics also believed that anytime you interpreted Torah, if you gave a new interpretation, we were creating heavens and earth, you were creating Merkiot, and
Sure.
you were actually creating worlds by new interpretations of Torah.
Right.
So in that way you were becoming also a creator. And also, I just wanted to say too that it says here, it says nothing should be added to these words and nothing taken away.
Yeah.
It was also a statement
In Deuteronomy.
that you needed to be connected with the tradition, that if you were receiving information from people who were not connected to the tradition, you were in big trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a verse in Deuteronomy. You shouldn't add anything or take anything away from the Torah. Now let me give you...
Not to add vowels.
No, not to add
Anything.
ideas. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But let me now summarize why I think this text gives you the major characteristics of Jewish mysticism, at least most of them, and what those characteristics are. And as we went through the text, I tried to identify them, but you may have missed it. So I'd like to suggest to you that here in this text we just studied, you have 12 major characteristics of Jewish mysticism. The first, we've seen in a number of the parts of the text, we don't have to go through it again, that the apparent is not necessarily the real. You saw that right at the beginning with the donkey driver. Secondly, you see, we just discussed it, the idea that the mystical experience is a self-transforming experience. That the goal of the mystical experience may be many things, but one of the goals and one of the effects is that the person ends up to be a different person. It's a kind of conversion of the person, a transformation of the person from who they were before the experience to who they become after the experience. Thirdly, the idea that Kabbalah, that Jewish mysticism, is an active receptivity. That it is Kabbalah, it is something received, but it is an active receipt, just like the seduction of the scholar is a very active seduction. Fourthly, as you see the theme of the whole story, it's the unveiling of the concealed, which of course assumes that there are things that are concealed and assumes that they're worthy of being revealed. Fifthly, you have the theme here, and you have this theme running through many of the ideas of the Kabbalists regarding the observance of various Jewish rituals, that we strive to internalize, in our experience, biblical experience. In other words, that biblical experience is not something that simply happened once to them, but it's something that you can incorporate within your own life through mastery of certain rituals and techniques. So, for example, the celebration of the Passover Seder is not simply something that happened to them then, but this act of redemption is something that you can experience yourself. Receiving the Torah at Sinai is something that Moses experienced, but is also something you can experience yourself. The sixth idea is that the Torah, or more specifically the sacred word, is a rendezvous place with God. That one place where you have access to the divine is through the sacred word. Seventh idea, which we saw right in the beginning, is their idea which I think is unique to Jewish mysticism. I don't think you find it in other mystical systems, that study of the sacred text is itself a mystical experience. Eighthly, you see here in the Zohar text and in the Zohar's commentary to the biblical text, the idea that every text has multivalent meanings. That there are many levels of meaning within every text, and decoding the text is not simply one code, one meaning, but many codes and many meanings. Ninthly, connected to eighth, we see that the language here is a symbolic language. That's why it's multivalent, because symbols always act on many levels at the same time. And when you're dealing with a symbolic language, you need the keys, the access codes, to break the symbols to understand what it's all about. That's going to be our next topic of discussion next week. Tenthly, I would suggest you see here that the mystics, while they were perceived by some Jews in the 18th, 19th century, as we discussed last week, as being a kind of lunatic fringe within Judaism, did not view themselves as a lunatic fringe within Judaism, but rather viewed themselves as having the most essential and correct form of Judaism. In other words, that the mystical interpretation of the Torah is the best one. So they did not see themselves on the fringe, they saw themselves on the in the core. Eleventhly, the mystical experience always begins with the assumption that there is a gap between the human and the divine. One of the things the mystical experience tries to do is to bridge that gap. But one thing that they find out once they have bridged the gap is that the gap is not real. In other words, that you begin with the assumption there is a distance between us and the Torah, us and God, us and truth, us and intimacy with God. But once you've achieved the communion with God, the intimacy with God, or the intimacy with the Torah, you see that there really was no distance to begin with. That's why the scholar, the lover, is a fool, because he doesn't realize that the intimacy that he sees as being totally beyond his reach, with the princess up in the top of the minaret in the palace, is really very much within his reach. That the distance between them is more illusionary than real. That the garments she's wearing and the veils between him and her are really illusion and not real. And finally, the 12th characteristic I would say that we have from this text is that the idea of Jewish mysticism as a vehicle of how to reach a higher consciousness through self-transformation. In other words, that one of the goals of the mystical experience is not simply to have a whoopee experience, but it's to achieve a self-transformation aimed at a movement of the individual from their potential state to their actualized state, or to their self-realized state, or to their higher consciousness state. And in some of the mystical schools, like Kabbalah, for example, you have the idea that when you achieve the height of the mystical or prophetic experience, as he calls it, you have a vision of yourself in your most highly realized state. In other words, you have a vision of, you finally realize who you really are, when all of your potentials are realized. Then you come down from that experience, and then you have the problem of transition. Namely, how do you make the transition from who you are to who you now see you can become? So it's a process not simply of knowing certain things, not simply of knowing the secret knowledge, the gnosis, but it's a process of self-transformation. And a self-transformation of yourself from who you are to who you are in your most self-realized state, from potential to absolute actuality. Let me make one final point, and that is about this verse that you mentioned before. You shouldn't add anything or you shouldn't take anything away. In 18th century Lithuania, in Dubno, there was a famous preacher, the preacher of Dubno. He was probably the greatest preacher in all Jewish history, though of course every rabbi thinks that he is. And he was a great storyteller, and he had the following commentary on this verse. You shouldn't add anything to the Torah, and you shouldn't take anything away. And the story is this. Once there was a man who had his friend come to him, and his friend said to him, my daughter is getting married. I need to borrow from you a silver spoon. So the man said, okay, here's a silver spoon. Bring it back tomorrow. So the man takes the silver spoon. Next day he comes back. He gives his friend 5 silver spoons. He says to him, I only lent you 1 silver spoon. How come you're giving me... I'm sorry, he gives him 2 silver spoons. He says, how come you're giving me today 2 silver spoons? He says, because last night I took the spoon, I had my future in-laws over, I used the spoon at the dinner. After the dinner, I put the spoon in safekeeping in the drawer till I could bring it back today. And overnight, the spoon gave birth, and I have 2 spoons. So they're your spoons, so here's the 2 spoons. Man says, okay. So a few weeks pass, the man comes back to his friend. He says, you know, my future in-laws are coming, but they're bringing the rest of the family. Can I borrow 5 silver spoons? I'll bring them back tomorrow. The man says, okay. Gives him 5 silver spoons. Next day, his friend comes back. He says to him, here are the spoons back that you lent me. And the man counts the spoons, and there are 10 silver spoons. He says, but I only lent you 5 silver spoons. He says, well, each one of them gave birth, and now we have 10 silver spoons. So a few weeks pass, and he says, well, now they're inviting even the more extended family. Can you give me 10 silver spoons? He says, okay. So the next day the guy comes back, and he says to him, here are 30 silver spoons. He says, but I only gave you 10. He says, well, each gave birth, and each had twins. So finally, the guy comes a few weeks later, and he says, well, look, my daughter's wedding party she got married, the wedding party is this week, and this is really a very special occasion. Can you loan me 10 gold spoons? So the man is already calculating, what is he going to bring back, if I lend him 10 gold spoons? So he lends him the 10 gold spoons, and the next day the man comes back, and he says to his friend, I'm sorry, I can't give you back what you loaned me. So his friend says, why? He says, well, you know those 10 gold spoons you gave me? I served them at the party. After the party, I put them in the drawer. Then the next morning, I opened the drawer to give them back to you, and I can't give them back to you. So his friend says, why can't you give them back to me? He says, you see, because overnight, they died. He says, what do you mean they died? How can a spoon die? So the friend says, well, look, you didn't complain when I gave you 1 and it became 2, 5 and it became 10, 10 when it became 30. You believed when I told you a spoon can give birth, you believed it. So if you believe a spoon can give birth, why can't you believe a spoon can die? So the Maggid of Dubno said, that's the meaning of this verse. You shouldn't add anything, and you shouldn't subtract anything. That if the spoon can be born, then the spoon can die. All right, I wish you all a Happy New Year, and next week we'll
We're having
go on.
class next Wednesday.
Yes.